Hello, everyone. We are going to get started here. If folks could type into the bottom left chat if you can hear me to confirm that the sound is working, I would really appreciate that. Okay, fantastic. We have a lot of people who can hear me. That's a good sign. And we have a lot of people here on this call, which is really exciting. Welcome, everyone, to the webinar, Community Solar 101, hosted by the Center for a New American Dream. My name is Wen Lee. I'm the Director of Online Media and Engagement at the Center for a New American Dream. I'm really excited and thrilled to have all of you here today with us on this very important and exciting topic of community solar projects. As you all have already figured out, on the bottom left there is a chat window. You'll see a public tab and a private tab. The public tab is where everyone can see what you type. So this is sort of a community conversation area. If you feel like sharing things that you want everyone to see, go ahead and type in there. The private chat will go only to me. So that is if you have questions at the very end. And I'll talk about that a little more in just a second. So today we're going to be talking about community solar projects, sort of at an introductory level. We have two really wonderful speakers with us today, Anya Schoolman and Dan Conant. And I really hope that by the end of this hour, you will all be much more inspired and have much more tools at your disposal to put on community solar projects in your town and in your city. So for those of you who are unfamiliar with the Center for a New American Dream, we are a nonprofit organization, and this is our mission statement. The Center for a New American Dream helps Americans to reduce and shift their consumption to improve quality of life, protect the environment, and promote social justice. So the nonprofit is really trying to promote Americans to reconsider what the American dream means and what our society considers success and what is really going to give us happiness. So instead of a consumer-driven culture, New Dream really wants to encourage people to focus more on what matters, which is stuff that really makes us happy, such as community building, meaningful relationships with friends and family, and a healthy environment. So we have our three program areas: Redefining the Dream, Beyond Consumerism, and Collaborative Communities. And this webinar is part of a series, which is part of our Collaborative Communities program. This is a way that we're trying to give folks real practical advice and tools to organize in their communities and to really build more resilient and local thriving communities around the country. So today's topic folds very neatly into that. We're going to be talking about solar energy and how the power of community can bring solar to communities at a more affordable price and make it more accessible for everyone. Okay, so what is community solar? So this is a very broad definition that I have here on the slide. So a community solar project involves any kind of solar system that provides power. So that could be electricity, it could be heated water, and or financial benefit to, or is owned by multiple community members. So one thing that I think will all come out of this webinar with is the realization that there's no one-size-fits-all model. There isn't just like one way to do solar for your community that will work for everyone around the country. It really depends on where you live, what kind of home you're living in, who is in your community, and what makes sense for you. And so our speakers will talk about all the different models that they have heard of and what they have experienced with. But again, please keep in mind that every community is different and every community has different needs. So we hope to give you some ideas today on what's possible. But when it comes down to it, it's really about you and what you feel is best for your community and what makes sense. So just real quick, I would actually love to find out who's out there and see what kind of diversity of backgrounds we have out there in this webinar. So I'm going to put a couple questions up on the slides here. And I would love for you all to just quickly take this poll. We're interested to know, 1, are you a homeowner? So you can go ahead and click yes or no. And 2 is, what would you say your community is best described as? Would you say it's urban, city, dense, or suburbs? Is it more of a small town, or is it more rural? So go ahead. I'll give you guys a few more seconds to go ahead and click your answer. And I'll show you the results in just a second. I'll give you 5 more seconds. Ha ha ha, the pressure. Okay. Okay. So here we go. Let's see the results here. Okay. So for those of you who took the poll, looks like 71% of people on this call are homeowners, 21% are not. And we have a smattering of different communities represented here, urban, suburban, small town, and rural. So that's really interesting, and that's something I think that is really informative of all the different kinds of people around the country that want to go solar, and different ways that we can go about going there. So thanks everyone for participating in the poll. We're going to go back to the presentation now. Okay, so to answer some of those questions, we are going to have 2 amazing speakers with us today, Anya Schoolman and Dan Conant. So just as a brief introduction for each of them, Anya Schoolman has been working on environment and sustainable development for more than 25 years. She spent nearly 10 years in the federal government at the EPA and the Department of the Interior, and the following 10 years working as a strategic advisor for NGOs and foundations, working on strategy, grant making, campaign design, and energy policy. She founded the Mount Pleasant Solar Cooperative in 2006 with her son Walter. As president of the co-op, she has led a citywide effort in DC to make solar accessible and affordable to anyone who wants it. She has assisted more than 70 homeowners in the DC area to go solar and has helped foster the creation of 11 sister co-ops that have joined together to form a citywide organization called DC Solar United Neighborhoods. She is also the founder of the Community Power Network, and she's going to be talking about all of these in just a second. Our other speaker is Dan Conant. So Dan was born and raised in the hollers of West Virginia on a mission to develop community-scale solar and efficiency projects as a way to wean ourselves from coal and protect his home mountains. His successful projects include founding and directing the Arlington Solar Raisers program in Virginia, and he has organized hundreds of Vermont families to go solar together through the VPIRG Solar Communities program and its spinoff, SunCommon, where he is now a solar community organizer. Dan now lives outside of Burlington, Vermont, and this spring he will complete a Master's of Science in Environmental Science and Policy from Johns Hopkins University. So big welcome to Anya and Dan. We're going to hear from both of them. And we will have plenty of time to ask them questions as well. So as for the structure of the webinar, we are going to start off with brief presentations by Anya and then Dan. Then I will share with you some further resources that you can check out on the internet to learn more about this topic. And then we're going to spend the bulk of the latter half of this webinar on the Q&A sessions for Anya and Dan. So they will be answering your questions. So as I mentioned earlier, in your chat box on the bottom left, there's a public and a private tab. So I am actually going to draw questions straight from the private questions that are asked. So if you would like to ask a question during the Q&A session to either Dan or Anya, please go to the private tab and chat the questions to Wen Lee. And I will make sure to record all the questions. And when we do our Q&A, I will do my very best to cover as many as I can But please do chat it to me privately, because that's where I'm going to be drawing the questions from. So as Anya and Dan are talking, if you think of a question, go ahead and just put it into the private chat box, and I will keep a list of questions as we go through. Okay, so I think without further ado, we're going to get started here. We will get started with Anya, and she's going to talk about her experiences in the DC area. So Anya, I'm going to give you the floor here. You can go ahead and unmute yourself.
Thanks, Wen. Thanks. Really excited to be on this webinar, and looking forward to the Q&A. There's a picture of my roof. I think that might even be me standing on my roof in Washington, D.C. What I'm going to do today is give everybody a little sense of what was the process that we went through in D.C. and some of the lessons learned, and then I hope to spend some time at the end of sort of how does that experience apply to other situations. And I'm going to kind of generalize the experience somewhat, because each locale is different. So what I really want to talk about is the process, and my belief that almost any community, no matter what your incentives, what your physical environment, what your economic level, culture, or politics, can go solar. The key is finding the right model that fits your community. So my story starts back in 2006 when my son Walter, this one right here, he was 12 at the time, and he and his best friend Diego went to see the movie Inconvenient Truth. And they came back after seeing the movie, and they were like, you know, we have to do something. This is ridiculous. Why don't we go solar? And so we looked into it, and we were overwhelmed. This is, again, 2006. The incentives were very few. The federal tax credits were capped at a maximum of $2,000. There was no local incentives in D.C. The equipment was confusing. The rules were confusing. Dealing with the utility was confusing. And we went back to the boys, and we were like, you know, this is too expensive, and it's too much work to do one house. So if we're going to do it, we have to do the whole neighborhood. Otherwise, it's just not worth the effort. Are you in? And we kind of thought these two 12-year-old boys would bail on us at that point in the process. But what happened instead was they drew up a sign-up sheet, and it said the Mount Pleasant Solar Co-op. Mount Pleasant's the name of our neighborhood. And would you like to join? Do you want to go solar? And they went up and down the steps in our neighborhood, dropping it from door to door. And 2 weeks later, we had 50 members and absolutely no idea what we were going to do. And we, at that point, really started an education in what is our energy market, and really trying to understand energy markets. And because of that, and I'll get back to this later when we talk to resources, whenever I'm talking to people about going solar or doing renewable energy in their community, I say the first step is you have to understand your local market. What are the rules? What are the interconnection rules? What are the incentives? All the different pieces. So we started talking to local installers, we talked to regulators, we talked to government people, and considered a bunch of different options, and then ended up moving to working on legislation in DC. And key to our success with that legislation was, in fact, the fact that we had organized over 300 homes in our community all to fight for solar. And then as a group, we engaged our elected officials, worked on a piece of legislation. We used the fact that we now understood how the energy markets in our community worked to change the energy market to create a long-term sustainable incentive for solar. And one of the keys was that we always had as our goal that it had to be replicable and scalable and affordable. So we really didn't seriously consider any kind of one-off approaches like a grant or a bake sale or something like that. We really were looking for scalable solutions. So we passed a major piece of legislation in D.C. in 2009 and then started a bulk purchase where we solarized 45 homes. And this picture you see here is the green and the yellow dots are all the homes that got done as a group in 2009. We've basically been continuing at a very, very steady pace since then. We have now over 10% of the neighborhood. But we didn't stop there. And what was so exciting about it was that we really, we changed our motto at this point to going solar is the beginning, not the end of the process. And here again you see the two boys, 3 years older, and now they're our primary spokespeople. They're doing an on-camera interview with the local TV station at our local solar fair, where we really took the success story from our neighborhood and shared it with our whole city, invited people from all over the city. We also got a huge amount of TV coverage, which really brought us national attention, but also built our credibility in D.C. And so after our success in 2009, starting the process of solarizing our neighborhood, we helped other solar co-ops form all across D.C. And essentially, in each case, the co-op started with a talk kind of like this, where we said, you know, it's possible. You don't need to know what you're doing before you start. You just need to know what you want to do. These groups formed and then started working together to really do a series of major legislative reforms. I'm actually going to go back a slide for a second. One of the keys to our success in D.C. is that we deliberately made sure that there were at least one group in each political jurisdiction in the city. And that is one of the really important things to think about, which is that you can focus your energy in terms of organizing and doing projects with a political overlay. Who's the legislator that is most important on the committee? Do a solar project in their district, invite them to the event, bring them to the ribbon cutting, and let them enjoy solar and build support. And what we found, and what I'm finding in communities all across the country, is that if you really organize real people in a community, people who own homes, who pay taxes, who are involved in the community, who are members of the church, who are on the PTA, legislators, no matter what their political persuasion, will pay attention, and they can be converted. So we now, if you look at this this map, we have now converted D.C. into 100% solar council. And with that political power, we built what I call the political infrastructure. I'm just going to whiz through this, but for a series of reforms, because what you'll find in your community is there's no silver bullet to creating a green energy market. There's a series of fairly substantial and continuing reforms transform how your market is structured and how it's implemented. And it can go anywhere from creating incentives, changing the rules on interconnection with your utility, changing how the political organization, creating local community groups, pricing tariffs, grants, and so forth. And each community in each state has a different set of issues. But the key to it, again, is projects, real people, in real places. So I'm going to close with just a little bit of sort of what happened next. We're continuing our work in D.C., but we've also, I've launched a couple other big projects that really grew out of my work in D.C. And one is called the Community Power Network. And what I discovered is that I wasn't the only one, that in fact there were neighbors, communities, groups, farm organizations, church organizations, all kinds of people all over this country that were trying or had already succeeded in doing what I was doing or a version of what I was doing. And so I formed this community power network as a place to help people find each other. There's a map where you can just search the map, you can click on it, and you can search by state and find groups in your state. If you create a group, you can register the group and create a page for your group there. We have a lot of directories in terms of tools and resources. And I'd love feedback from people on groups that are missing from the network or ways to improve the network, and please join us. The other project that I most recently started is called Solar Citizen, and it is a national, this is more of a person-to-person, direct internet, direct email kind of approach, but it's really about tools and resources for doing this kind of organization in your community. And it's in project with American Solar Energy Society, ACES. It's just started. We just had our first issue last week, and we're going to be dealing with all sorts of issues related to solar rights, solar organizing, solar community tools and resources. I think that I'm going to stop it here and then wait till questions and make sure we have a lot of time for that. But thank you so much, and I'm looking forward to the Q&A part and also Dan's presentation.
Great. Thank you so much, Anya, for that wonderful presentation. I have been getting a lot of questions coming in, and I have been keeping a list. So keep continuing sending in your questions, and we'll be sure to get through as many as we can through Q&A. Okay, so as of right now, I would like to have Dan Conant give his presentation. Dan is based now in Vermont, and he's going to give a presentation about his experiences in Vermont as well as in Virginia. So Dan, take it away.
Great. Well, thank you so much, Wen, and thank you so much, Anya, as well. That was a fantastic overview of all the work that Anya's been doing. I got into the solar community world because I grew up in West Virginia, and I don't know if you guys have heard much about this, but in West Virginia we have a little issue with mountaintop removal coal mining. And as far back as I can remember, I just absolutely hated mountaintop removal coal mining, because essentially what happens is the tops of the mountains are blown off and the coal is scooped out, and it just flattens an area. So I've always wanted to find a way to fix that, and somewhere along the way, I think it was in college, I came to the realization that if we were going to protect the mountains, we needed to leave the coal in the ground. And if we were going to leave the coal in the ground, we needed to replace the electricity that was requiring it. So we needed to find a better way to get the alternatives of solar and wind and biomass and hydro up and running. But then from there, the single biggest issue I had been running into whenever I was talking with folks around the country about why solar wasn't happening, there were just so many barriers that were getting in the way. So I've talked with literally thousands of people across Vermont and across Virginia about going solar, and there were always a few issues that were being repeated over and over about why folks weren't going solar, because they absolutely loved the idea. But the big issues were, number one, just the upfront cost. Folks don't have $20,000 or $30,000 laying around that they can plow into solar. So we really need to crack the financing code to make this feasible for folks. Besides that, the other issues were complexity, like Anya had mentioned earlier. People would get halfway through and then throw up their hands in frustration because it just got too complicated, and trying to put together a system became a part-time job in and of itself. So we needed to figure out a way to break through that complexity. And then the other big issue has just been the tax credits. So the single biggest incentive for solar is a federal tax credit that covers 30% of the cost of the system. But we were working with a lot of folks who just couldn't take the tax credits for whatever reason. So we really need to build that into the financing structure as well, a way to make sure that everyone can participate in that and make sure that everyone's able to take advantage of those incentives. So whenever I was dreaming up a different model or a different program for a solar community program, I always took those barriers into consideration. And ultimately, if you're going to design a program, it needs to be useful. It needs to provide something of value to people. So the question is, how do we break through those barriers, and how do we open up solar to everybody and make it accessible for everybody? So there are a couple different models that I've hit on and that I've had a lot of fun putting together. The first was the Solar Raisers program in Arlington, Virginia. And the idea here is that we banded together as a community to install solar on each other's homes. We focused in on solar hot water this program because it was simpler. There weren't interconnection issues with the grid. It was a standalone system, as well as it was lower upfront cost and just more affordable for folks in Virginia. So the idea here is a family would buy the parts, they would buy the system, and then they'd invite their entire neighborhood, all their friends over to help install the system in a day. Over the course of 1 year, we ended up putting in 5 solar systems in the community as a result of this program. And we brought together not just the homeowners, but the manufacturers of the solar hot water systems, local plumbers who were looking for training opportunities to expand their skill set, and really tried to find a way to bring the community together around solar in a way that would raise the profile of hot water. It was a fantastic little program, and through our efforts, we were able to reduce the cost of the solar hot water systems by over 50%. So instead of it costing $8,000, we'd get it down under $4,000, which is a really significant drop. And as a result, it would take 3 or 4 years to pay back the system for the families. So that was the first model, and just as that program was taking off, I got a call from the Vermont Public Interest Research Group up here in Vermont. And what they were doing was starting up a little bulk buying club program. So what was that? In 2011, I moved up to Vermont to help start up this Solar Communities program. And the idea here is that we were going town by town, grouping folks together to all go solar at the same time. This is similar to what Anya has been doing, but the key to this program was that it was a limited time offer. So we would work in a town for about 3 months, try to get as many folks together to go solar at the same time as possible, and as a result, we were able to drastically reduce the cost through the power of bulk purchasing. In our experience, we found that doing these clubs reduced the cost by 20 to 25%, and actually started getting it into the range of what people were paying already for electricity. Because that's ultimately the goal, is how do you make solar cost less than traditional fossil fuel-fired electricity. And by doing these bulk buying clubs, we're actually able to hone in on that point. The VPIRG in Vermont had actually been inspired by another program out in Portland called Solarize Portland that was put together by the planning commission out there. So they're another fantastic group to look at for inspiration. And then a final model that several communities have been approaching and getting projects successfully up and running is the community-owned solar. In particular, you can look at the University Park, Maryland project, where they installed a system large enough to power a church and brought together investors from around the community to invest common solar system. That does require a lot more legal work to make it possible for folks. So that requires a different skill set. But then on a kind of simpler version of that, I've actually been working on several projects up here in Vermont with a system called GroupNet metering, where 2 or 3 or 4 families will all come together to buy one common solar system and then share the electricity on their monthly bills. So one in particular that just got up and running here is a system where a church didn't have a good roof for solar, but one of their board members did. So we put in a system large enough on his barn to cover not just him, but also the entire church's electricity usage. So as a result, he's gone solar, the entire congregation has gone solar, and we're getting a lot more renewable energy up and running. So it's a really fantastic model. The only catch to that is it does require legislative approval. So we worked for a long time in Vermont to get that up and running, and I know in Virginia right now there's an effort to get group net metering legalized as well. But once you've got that, it's a really fantastic way to bring the community together around solar. Now, how have those programs actually fared? With the VPIRG Vermont initiative, we ended up having 300 systems installed over the course of just 1 year. By comparison, there had only ever been 1,200 ever installed in the entire state, and we did 300 in 5 towns. This map on the right-hand side, you can actually see the towns where we operated because they're red and orange. In Montpelier, right here, there had been 13 installed in the previous decade combined, and over the course of 4 months, we ended up having 75 systems installed. It was just fantastic, and it would really catch on in the community, and neighbors would be telling their neighbors, and pretty soon you're getting kind of the viral approach to solar, and it's amazing how much it can take off by really focusing in on specific towns. Solarize Portland had similar successes, and another group over in New Hampshire called in Plymouth, New Hampshire has done over 100 solar barn raisings in the past 8 years. So I think the lesson from all of this is that there really is an opportunity here. We just need to get groups up and running to tackle it. So the keys to the success of all the programs that I've seen are, number one, you want to keep it simple. Whenever we were doing a program, we didn't do hot water and electricity. We did electricity or hot water because you don't want to confuse people with having different technologies. You know, it gets complicated, and you don't want to add any more complication than you need to. Same thing goes for efficiency. It's great if you do one project and then follow it up with another. So, for instance, in Portland, they did the Solarize Portland program. It took off, and then they followed up with all those folks to help them get more efficient. And that worked out well, but what they specifically did not do is try to combine them all at the same time. The second piece is I think you need to provide a real tangible financial benefit for folks. Education isn't enough. You know, people know they want solar. They've wanted solar for a really long time, but they also know it's been really expensive. So the question in designing any single program is how do you bring it within reach of folks? How do you make the finances work, and how do you ultimately make solar cost less than what folks are already paying for electricity? So if you can provide that benefit, that financial benefit, then it's going to take off, and people are going to tell their neighbors, and you'll be all set from there. Another piece to this is the limited time offer behind it. We found that if you're doing a year-long or a 2-year-long program, that gives people a reason to procrastinate. And it's like any sale. You need to have kind of a buy now clause. So we really honed in on the 3 to 5 months of organizing, which gave us enough time to get the word out and get folks excited about the program, but then not giving them enough time to kind of dilly-dally and hang on and forget to do it. And then the fourth key to it was that we were talking with people in person. So all my organizing activities have been around doing community presentations. Like just last week, I had more than 10% of one town come out to a single presentation. And it's really important that you talk to people face-to-face, not just rely on a website. And besides that, we also went with the existing groups. So we go to the Lions Club, we go to the Rotary Club, we work with existing groups and really try to meet people where they are. Now, in addition to the successes, there have been a few challenges, and you'll want to make note of these as well. The first big one is balancing the installation capacity with the small installers. So one of our big struggles in Vermont was we actually got overloaded with folks wanting systems installed. And so we went with one single installer to make it financially viable for folks. But then we ended up kind of getting a lot of pushback from folks because they felt like we were pushing out the small installers. So you're going to want to be sensitive of kind of the industry politics, and how do you make sure that people are able to get systems installed in a timely manner without, and a fairly simple program without making people feel like they're being left out. And then the final big challenge is just making sure that the finances are all lined up. So when we started the VPIRG program, we didn't have a loan program set up through a credit union. So we were still expecting people to kind of go out and figure that out, or just pay cash, and that's just not possible for a lot of folks. So we went back and redesigned our program and negotiated discounted loans through local credit unions and really made it a one-stop shop. So the key to this piece is just making sure that you've designed a program that can appeal to as many as possible. So that's about all I have for y'all. Feel free to get in touch with me even after this presentation. I'm happy to answer questions and help folks design a program that could work for you. I'm really looking to help folks around the country replicate these models. So feel free to get in touch with me if you have any questions.
Great. Thank you so much, Dan and Anya, for those fabulous presentations. Before we dive into the Q&A session, I just want to touch on a few more resources that are available online. The first I want to tell you about is the Center for New American Dreams Community Action Kit. So New Dream has put out a series of online guides that are absolutely free, and that is our Community Action Kit. And one of the guides is the Guide to Sharing, which you'll see some screenshots of here. So in the Guide to Sharing, we do talk about solar cooperatives, of course, because we are basically talking about sharing, sharing access to solar and sharing solar energy. So we have a step-by-step guide on how to start a solar cooperative, and there's a ton of resources in here, not just for solar projects, but also other sharing projects like tool libraries and time banking. So you can go to guidetosharing.org to check out this free PDF that you can download. Also, some more resources. These were, some were mentioned earlier by Anya. So the Community Power Network, of which she founded, is president for. There's their website right there. More information about the Mount Pleasant Solar Cooperative and the DC Sun and Solar Citizen. Those are organizations that Anya mentioned earlier, and you can go to their website and find out more about them. Also, there's a fantastic solarized guidebook put out by NREL, the U.S. Department of Energy, as well as the City of Portland. It's called the Solarized Guidebook. It is also a free PDF that you can get online that you can download from this link. And for those of you who are frantically writing down all these websites right now, that's great. But if you can't write it down fast enough, don't worry about it. All of these slides will be provided to all of you on our website after this webinar is over. So you will have all of these resources again. So you don't have to write them all down right now. Do check out these resources. There's so much more to learn, and this is a good place to start. Okay. So we're going to dive now into questions in the last 20 minutes here. I've been gathering a lot of great questions from folks on all sorts of topics. The first question that I would like to ask, multiple people had asked. They were curious about the difference, what exactly is a cooperative? When you say, Anya, you started a solar cooperative, is that actually something different than, a bunch of people buying stuff together? And what is the distinction between a cooperative, like a co-op, and just a bunch of people buying stuff together? So maybe, Anya, you can speak to that?
Sure. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Great. So it's a great question. When we started the project, we weren't sure what legal structure our project was going to take. And we seriously considered a formal cooperative. And there's a few I know of in the U.S. that are formal solar cooperatives, like your, health food cooperative, where it's actually a group of people that own a solar installation. You can find a couple of them through Community Power Network, but there's like Edmond Solar Cooperative, and there's the Cleveland Solar Cooperative. In my case, we ended up not going that route, and the reason we seriously considered it. We actually even did, financial models and legal structures for cooperatively owned solar, but we ended up having so much success on the advocacy front that we created a really strong incentive for residential, and partially at the advice of our lawyer, or we had pro bono legal counsel, we ended up being more cooperative in the sense of facilitating a group of people, organizing a bulk purchase, sharing information, and then doing advocacy. But the actual, in our case in DC with the solar cooperatives, the actual ownership of the panels is an individual contract between the homeowner and the solar installer. So we are using the term as more like a collaborative work rather than the formal term of like a cooperatively owned business. But there are, like I said, there are a bunch of other models in the U.S. where it's actually a cooperative.
Great, awesome. Thanks, Anya. Another question that we have been getting from folks, this is a question from Chris. He's wondering, what are the advantages of doing this kind of community solar projects instead of getting, one of the low or zero money down lease from the for-profits like Solar City or Sungevity? There are a lot of solar companies out there that claim that they can make solar power more affordable for individuals. Do you feel that going community is still more affordable, or are the companies making it already pretty good for individuals? And either of you can speak to that.
And actually, I'll jump in there.
Okay, you can jump in there.
Okay, great. I actually don't think that they need to be separate. So in our case, the VPIRG program was so successful that we spun off to become a separate company. And when we spun off to become SunCommon, we actually introduced the first no upfront costs solar leasing program to Vermont. And we're still using the bulk purchasing concept of the bulk purchasing model, but it's to drive down the installation costs to make it even more affordable for folks. We're using the lease financing to make that happen, but really the financing is just a tool to make installation can get paid for. But we're still using the community installation concept as a way to drive down the costs. Without that community installation, we wouldn't be able to beat people's existing electric bills because the installers would be driving 2 hours between potential sites.
Can I add to that about the third-party leasing? One of the issues with those companies like the Solar Cities and Sungevities is that they're really only operating in really robust, strong solar markets. And there's a lot of markets that either have a ban or a or limits on third-party ownership, or the incentives just aren't good enough, or the combination of incentives and low electricity prices. So you actually only find those companies really prevalent in, California, New Jersey, even a handful of other states, Colorado. And so one of the things about cooperative ownership is it's really a model, and there's, of course, cooperative ownership is a broad word for a bunch of different models from, as Dan pointed out, do-it-yourself barn-raising approaches to community-owned businesses to group advocacy. But it's a way to start building solar in markets that are not developed yet, where you really have to create the market or create new conditions in order to make the market work for you. So it's one of many tools, and it's a particularly effective tool, especially in undeveloped solar markets.
And actually, we had exactly that problem in Vermont because we had been talking with several big national companies trying to get them to come here, but in addition to the incentives not being in place, Vermont only has 600,000 people, so we're basically a medium-sized city anywhere else in the country. Just the number of homes wasn't attractive to any of those big companies, so we set out and did it ourselves.
This is actually a really great tie-in to the next question. This is a question from Catherine and also Nathan and some other folks. They live in rural areas. They are on lots of 2 to 3 acres. There's a lot of farmland and only a few houses in an area. The houses are not close together. So they are wondering, would a solar community be feasible in that kind of environment, and whether you have advice as to how they can move forward.
Absolutely, and up here with the VPIRG program and now with SunCommon, basically all of Vermont is small rural towns. So most of the towns we've been doing our bulk buying clubs in have 500,000, 2,000 people, and even if you're able to get 5 or 10 homes in that town together, you can still significantly drop the cost of the systems. Because ultimately what was driving up the cost for the installers was needing to market, needing to find those customers. In this case, you're just basically hand-delivering a group of excited people who want to go solar. And then from there, they had to, without these clusterings, they were driving 100 miles between site visits, and that's what was driving up the cost. So even by getting 5 or 10 folks where you can just bop around town in a single day, you're able to tap into that bulk purchasing power.
Yeah, I actually want to second what Dan says. We've found with as little as 5 houses, if you get the group together and then you just do a competitive RFP for the install, you can drop the cost as much as 30% just by taking care of those marketing and transport and all those other costs.
Great. Okay. We have some questions about how to find out state-specific laws that have to do with solar projects that might impede community solar deployment. So do you guys have any advice for folks that just want to find out what's going on in their state and how they can find out what the laws are?
I actually I mentioned at the end of my presentation that I just started this project called Solar Citizen in partnership with ACES. And you can just Google like ACES/Solar Citizen. And my first issue, which just went out last week, was about how to understand your solar market. And it's all about, I think, 6 really important links. The one that's best known is called DESIRE, Database State Renewable Energy Incentive, DSIRE.org. But I have links on that Solar Citizen page to a whole bunch of them, different resources for understanding your solar market. And by that I mean understanding the local incentives and also the federal incentives. So I would really recommend checking out the Solar Citizen link as a first step. And then after that, talk to local installers. If you can find any local companies, they know it. And if you have any local government, state level people.
Yep. And I'll second that. The DESIRE is just a fantastic resource. I use that all the time. And the key is to look not just for the financial incentives, but a lot of the other permitting incentives, and there's a lot of other regulations that go into it beyond just the tax credits and the rebates.
Mm-hmm. Great, fantastic. We had a couple of questions about insurance from Catherine and some other folks. They are wondering, can you address how to insure solar panels? If a roof gets damaged, it's really expensive to replace it. And also just in general, how solar insurance works.
Dan, you want me to take that one?
Yeah, sure.
I mean, obviously it depends on what your situation is and where the panels are and who owns the panels. So if you're doing a leasing arrangement, like one of the big companies or a group like Dan's group, they own the panels, and you don't have to insure them. You have to make sure that the contract is clear in terms of insurance and responsibility. If the panels are on your own roof or your own property, it's an adder to your homeowner's insurance. And what's really interesting is that even though the panels are worth, a fair amount of money, some insurance companies actually lower your insurance rate because of their climate commitments or something like that. So they'll actually lower your rate with solar. I know that firemen's did that for a while. But it's generally not a large increase. What's less clear and more varied from jurisdiction to jurisdiction is your impact on your property taxes after you go solar, with some jurisdictions doing nothing and some jurisdictions raising your assessment because of the solar. So that you have to inquire locally about that.
Great. Thanks, Anya.
Sure.
Stephen is, oh, sorry. Go ahead, Dan. Did you want to say something?
No, Anya put it perfectly.
Okay, great. We have a question from Stephen. He's wondering about the physical installation of the solar equipment. Does it have to be done by professionals?
In our case with the Solar Raisers program, we had a combination of volunteers as well as professionals. So when we were putting together a solar raising, we partnered with a local installation firm, and they saw it as a good way to market themselves because they were working with 15 or 20 people, and ultimately they were kind of getting to know them and developing potential customers there. So they were more than willing to put in their time. So with each individual raising, we would bring together these trained professionals to guide us through the installation. It did make it go much quicker because we had all of the volunteers there. Now, I felt comfortable doing that with solar hot water, which is a self-contained system, and it's plumbing. It's much simpler. I wouldn't feel comfortable doing that with solar electric because if anything goes wrong there, it's much more dangerous, and ultimately you're connecting in with the grid, and there are a lot more regulations and safety codes around that. So I felt comfortable with the hot water, not with the electric.
Anya, do you have any comments about who does the actual installation in your experience?
What was the question?
Who are the ones that handle the actual physical installation of the solar panels in DC? Does it have to be done by a professional?
Oh yeah, in DC we and this is actually one of the great things I say that really varies by community. In DC we have tons of lawyers. We don't have so many people that know electricity and carpentry and things like that. So we definitely worked with professional installers, and what we tried to do is make sure that there was a really open, fair, and transparent way of choosing installers so that we kept promoting a vibrant and competitive market for the installers. But I'm working a lot with people in rural communities, for example, in West Virginia, where they have trouble finding pro bono lawyers, but they have no trouble finding really skilled carpenters and skilled electricians. And you still need a little bit of professional solar installation help in terms of the tilt and the sequencing and the exact layout of the solar, but you can do a whole lot of it with the community. And so you see much more often in rural communities, much more of a self-starter, self-help approach with maybe one technical expert, and then, and this is a generalization, but in urban communities you tend to see more people going for a professional installer.
Okay. Question from Pei and Tom. They're wondering if you know of any incentives for workplaces or nonprofit organizations to go solar? So are there any incentives out there for businesses or nonprofits or workplaces to go solar?
Yep, and I'll take that. It really depends on the location. So in Vermont, we actually have a specific incentive program for nonprofits and municipalities. The biggest challenge for nonprofits and municipalities, though, is the tax code. So as I've mentioned a couple times, the single biggest incentive for solar is a 30% federal tax credit. Well, if you don't pay taxes in the first place, you can't take that tax credit. And so that has really left a lot of nonprofits, churches, and municipalities out of the game. So in Vermont, we created an incentive, a rebate program from the state specifically tailored around those. The other way around it is if you put together a leasing program or a power purchase agreement. It doesn't necessarily need to be through one of the big companies. You could even put this together on a local level, like the group in Maryland, in University Park, Maryland did. You can put together a power purchase agreement or a lease where the investors and the company that owns the system is able to take those tax credits and make it possible for the nonprofit to take advantage of them by going through this financing arrangement. So that's going to be the key piece to any nonprofit or setup, is making sure that you can take advantage of those tax credits.
And I would just add to that, I thought Dan explained that really well. What we're doing in DC, or DC Sun, which is our umbrella organization for all the solar co-ops in DC, is we're doing a bulk purchase just for nonprofits. Because what we find is that nonprofits need extra help. The people are overextended, they're busy, they're trying to fulfill their primary mission, which usually isn't going solar. And so we've been applying this bulk purchase model, and actually just completed an RFP, and we've also developed an online tool for doing bulk purchase RFPs with a firm called Soul Systems, and we can share that tool so you don't have to reinvent the wheel in terms of making an RFP tool for, original, from scratch. But the model is bulk purchase RFP, but ultimately, because of the tax issues, it's a third-party leasing for nonprofits. So somebody else owns the solar and takes the tax credits on the solar.
And then as far as workplaces go, you can apply the same bulk purchase model to a for-profit company. So for instance, we've done several programs with big employers in the area. Up here, IBM is the biggest employer. I think they have 10,000 folks. So we went to IBM and said, hey, we can put together a special group discount for your employees. And it's another kind of employer incentive for the folks that work for them. So you can set up one of those programs as well.
Great. We have a couple more minutes. See if we can squeeze in two more questions. One question is specifically for Dan from Walton. He's from West Virginia as well, and he's wondering, are there any efforts to bring about solar to places like West Virginia, which is so dependent on coal, and whether you have any advice as to, if they have limited human resources, where should he and his colleagues put their energies to move solar forward in West Virginia?
Yeah, and that's one of my dreams for the long haul, is to be able to build up a renewable energy industry to take care of generations of West Virginians to come. There are a couple programs in place. One is called the Jobs Project, and what they are doing is training solar professionals down in the coal fields, so in McDowell County, kind of the southern tier of the state. And they are actually reclaiming mountaintop removal sites to install renewable energy, and they're training workers on how to do it. So they're a fantastic group. Another group that is starting to delve into it a little bit is called the Conservation Fund. They're based out of the West Virginia offices are based out of Shepherdstown in the Eastern Panhandle, and they're focusing on financing and how to develop these renewable energy incentive programs across the state. Unfortunately,
actually, I just wanted to add one thing, Dan. We've actually launched West Virginia Sun, which is it's a Google group. It's a network of solar advocates across the state, and we've got we've probably got half a dozen groups and companies involved, and so it's West Virginia Sun, and there's actually a link to sign up for it on the Community Power Network site, or you can email me if you want to join in on West Virginia Sun. So I didn't mean to cut you off, Dan. I just want to make sure I got that in.
But to the person who asked the question, please feel free to contact me, and let's strategize and figure out how to make it happen, because that's my dream right there.
Fabulous. And one last question from Peter. Do either of you know of any particular vendors and solar companies that have been cooperative about for bulk buying for either water or PV electricity?
It's really going to vary by place. Installers are generally local companies. There are the few big national players, but as Anya mentioned earlier, they really hone in on a couple different states. I would just look up the individual installers in your area and approach them. All the ones we've approached have been game for it. And then the question, as Anya mentioned earlier, is putting together an RFP process to make sure it's totally above board and transparent.
Yeah, and I would second everything Dan said. When we started, we talked to a bunch of installers before we had really organized and said we wanted to do this group purchase, and nobody believed us. And they were like, oh, yeah. And we were like, how much discount will you give us? And they were like, none, because you're never going to do it. We've seen it all before. Then when we did it, and in the subsequent rounds, when we did it, we got significant discounts. But you have to really don't take no for an answer, and then make sure it's a competitive process. Don't just go with the one installer that's like your buddy, or you're not going to get a good price. You have to really make some sort of competitive bidding process.
And on that note, a big difference between my experience and Anya's experience has been that I've been working through existing nonprofits versus starting from scratch like Anya did. So with VPIRG, it's a 40-year-old organization with 30,000 members around the state. So we had that existing market to tap into, all the members around the state. With Solar Raisers in Virginia, I was working with a local nonprofit called Arlingtonians for a Clean Environment, and Solar Raisers was a project of that. So in those cases, I was able to get around that initial hesitation by working with an existing group that had credibility, and the installers knew that when we wanted to do it, we would.
Fabulous. Okay, everyone, we are near at the end of our webinar. I really want to give big, huge thank yous to Anya Schoolman and Dan Conant for taking time out of their day to share their wisdom with us and to give advice and tips on how to go about bringing solar to our communities. As for some next steps, we will be sending out today or tomorrow a post-webinar survey. Please fill it out. New Dream really wants to make our webinars as useful as possible, and your feedback is incredibly important for that, so please fill out the survey. We have been recording this entire hour, and we will be putting the recording up online. All the resources mentioned will also be posted online. Everything should be up by the 28th, which is this coming Monday. And all of you, since you've registered for the webinar, you will receive an email letting you know when all these things are available. You have also been added to the New Dream mailing list, so you'll get more updates about future webinars and other projects that New Dream is doing. And of course, the most important next step is to please go forth, learn more, and go for it. Go solar. There's so much you can do out there. Please learn about what's out there in your community. Really, it just takes people who are determined and take the effort and go out there and do it. We also would love to hear about your stories. So if you do go out and have a success story, we'd love to hear about it. We'd like to hear about the impact that our webinars are making. If you have any questions whatsoever about the webinar or New Dream, you may contact me directly at wen@newdream.org. And lastly, I really want to thank everyone that participated in the webinar today. We had about 115 people at the very peak attend, and it's so great to see so many people interested in getting solar going in their communities all around the country. So thank you again. Any questions, please email me. And you are also welcome to contact Anya and Dan. Again, I will provide you with these slides so you'll have all of their resources. So I'm going to close this webinar. I hope everyone has a wonderful day, and thank you so much for joining us for this webinar.